Sorry, I accidentally backed over your $8,500 go-kart with Dad's truck, my brother said. He stood in my driveway, attempting to wear a mask of genuine shock, but the corners of his mouth twitched with a smug satisfaction he could not hide. My father stood right behind him, crossing his arms over his chest. Your kid can walk like everyone else, the old man added, his voice dripping with the familiar poison I had swallowed my entire life. I stood at my kitchen window, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, staring at the twisted metal that used to be my 11-year-old daughter's dream. I did not yell. I did not throw my cup against the glass. I just watched the oil bleed onto the concrete. You see, yelling is what desperate people do when they have lost control. But the men who build the skyline, the men who operate machines that weigh hundreds of tons, we do not yell. We calculate. And as I looked at the wreckage of my daughter's racing cart, I realized the time for keeping the peace was over. The time for demolition had begun. The sound of the destruction is what will stay with me forever. It was a slow, deliberate crunching of high-grade steel tubing and fiberglass. It was the sound of a heavy Ford F-150 pickup truck putting all of its weight onto a racing chassis built for a little girl. The truck belonged to my father, Alden. The man behind the wheel was my older brother, Merrick. They had rolled into my driveway unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the kitchen, washing out my thermos after a 12-hour shift operating a tower crane, when the shadow of the massive truck darkened my window. Merrick did not just pull in. He angled the rear of the vehicle, shifted into reverse, and pressed the gas pedal with a slow, agonizing purpose. The rear passenger tire climbed the back axle of Lyra's blue go-kart first. The fiberglass engine cover shattered with a sharp crack that echoed off the garage door. Then the weight shifted to the roll cage. That roll cage was meant to protect my daughter if she flipped on the dirt track, but it was not meant to withstand a 3-ton vehicle parking on top of it. The steel groaned, a sickening, high-pitched whine, before it buckled inward. The steering column snapped. The custom suede steering wheel, the one I had engraved with Lyra's name for her 11th birthday, popped off its mounting hub. It hit the concrete and rolled slowly down the slight incline of the driveway, stopping right against the toe of my work boot as I walked out the front door. Merrick opened the driver's side door and stepped out. He was 37 years old, wore a designer polo shirt paid for by credit cards he could not afford, and had the soft hands of a man who described himself as a startup consultant, but had not held a steady paycheck in 5 years. He put his hands up in a defensive gesture. "Whoa, Declan, I did not even see it there," he said. "I accidentally stepped on the gas instead of the brake." He was a terrible actor. His eyes were scanning the wreckage, taking in the crushed engine block and the bent frame, and I could see the petty victory dancing in his pupils. My father, Alden, climbed out of the passenger side. He was 65, a retired office manager who had spent his entire career in air-conditioned cubicles, making just enough to feel superior to anyone who got their hands dirty for a living. He looked at the ruined cart, then looked at me. "Good riddance," Alden said, his voice flat and unapologetic. "That thing was a dangerous waste of money anyway. Your kid can walk like everyone else. She does not need fancy toys to make her feel special." Lyra was standing in the hallway behind me. She had heard the noise and run out from her bedroom. I felt her small hand grip the back of my flannel shirt. She did not cry. My daughter has always been tougher than the men in my family combined. She just stared at the blue metal crushed under the muddy tire of her grandfather's truck. Her silence was louder than any scream. It was the silence of a child calculating exactly where she stood in the hierarchy of this family, realizing that her joy was considered an insult to her uncle's misery. I looked at Merrick. I looked at Alden. Then I bent down and picked up the suede steering wheel. The metal engraving of Lyra's name was scratched, but intact. I brushed a piece of broken glass off the leather and put it in my jacket pocket. I looked my brother dead in the eye and said nothing, not a single word. My silence unnerved them. They were waiting for an explosion. They wanted me to yell, to swing at them, to do something they could use to paint me as the unstable, blue-collar brute they always claimed I was. But I just stood there, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "Fine. Be a stubborn mute about it," Alden scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Come on, Merrick. Let us go." They got back in the truck and drove off, leaving the tire tracks in the spilled oil on my driveway. I turned around and knelt down to Lyra's eye level. I promised her I would fix it. I promised her she would race again. But as I watched the taillights of my father's truck disappear down the street, I knew I was not just going to fix a go-kart. I was going to dismantle the entire foundation of their lives, because they thought my silence was surrender. But what they did not know was that, in the shadows, a financial guillotine was already being built. There is a unique kind of isolation that comes with operating a tower crane 200 feet in the air. Up there in the glass cabin, the world below looks like a toy set. The wind howls against the reinforced windows, and the steel structure sways slightly with every gust. It is a job that requires absolute focus, a steady hand, and a deep respect for gravity. One wrong pull of the lever, one misjudgment of weight and momentum, and people die. I pull in $115,000 a year doing this job. It is hard, dangerous work, and I earn every single penny with the sweat on my brow and the calluses on my palms. But to my family, my profession has always been a punchline. Alden used to tell his golf buddies that I was just a glorified construction worker, a guy who played in the dirt because he lacked the brains for a real career. Merrick, with his endless stream of failed business ventures and maxed-out credit limits, viewed my income as a communal family fund. I was the invisible son. I was the one they ignored when they handed out praise, but the first one they called when the rent was due. And for years I let them. I swallowed the disrespect because I believed in the unbreakable bond of blood. I built a museum of pain in my mind, storing every slight, every insult, and every instance of exploitation. The first exhibit in that museum was the generator. 2 summers ago, Merrick decided he was going to take his son, Jace, on a luxury camping trip to prove he was a great father despite being unemployed. He demanded to borrow my heavy-duty portable generator, a $2,000 piece of equipment I relied on for emergency side jobs. He swore he knew how to run it. For days later, he dropped it off in my driveway while I was at work. The engine block was scorched, the housing melted, and the smell of burnt oil hung in the air for a week. He had run it dry without checking the oil, forcing it to power a massive portable air conditioning unit for his tent. When I confronted him, he just shrugged. "Things break, Declan. Do not be so materialistic." He never offered to pay for repairs. He never even apologized. The second exhibit was Lyra's 10th birthday. I had reserved a table at a premium steakhouse, her favorite place, a month in advance. I paid the deposit. I invited the whole family. 2 hours before the dinner, Alden called to say they were not coming. He demanded I move the dinner to a cheap pizza parlor across town. Why? Because Merrick complained that Jace did not like steak, and the upscale restaurant did not have chicken nuggets on the menu. When I refused to cancel my daughter's special night, they boycotted it entirely. Lyra blew out her candles looking at 4 empty chairs. Alden told me later I was being rigid and unaccommodating to my nephew's needs. My daughter's milestone was erased because my brother could not be bothered to parent his child for 2 hours. But the grand centerpiece of my museum, the artifact that anchored their entire existence to my hard work, was the Visa card. 30 months ago, Merrick's car insurance was about to be canceled for non-payment. He was facing the loss of his driver's license, which meant he could not drive to the phantom job interviews he always claimed to have. Alden guilt tripped me for days. "He is your brother, Declan. He just needs a bridge to get across this rough patch. You have the money. Stop being selfish." So, I gave Merrick my credit card number to put on file with his insurance company. Just for 2 months, he promised. Just until my consulting check clears. That was 30 months ago. Every month, $250 was quietly deducted from my account to keep Merrick legally on the road. $7,500 in total. I never changed the card number because every time I brought it up, Alden would accuse me of trying to sabotage my brother's future. I kept the peace. I paid the toll. I let them bleed me dry while they sneered at the dirt on my boots. But up in the crane, you learn that every structure has a load limit. You can only stack so much weight on a beam before it fractures. They had spent years testing my limits, piling their entitlement and their cruelty onto my shoulders, assuming I would just keep bearing the load. They thought my money was their birthright. They thought they could step on me and I would thank them for the privilege. Every single scratch they left on my life, I had kept a silent tally. And sitting there in my kitchen, looking at the oil stains on my driveway, I realized the final invoice was ready. The grace period was over. Every slight, every unpaid debt, every stolen moment was about to be collected. And they had no idea the storm that was coming for them. The catalyst for the destruction of Lyra's cart did not happen in the driveway. It happened 3 days earlier, over a phone call that still made my blood pressure spike just thinking about it. It was 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. I was sitting at the kitchen table going over my budget. I had just finalized the purchase of the blue Go-Kart for Lyra. She had been sweeping the floors at the local mechanics shop every weekend for 6 months, earning minimum wage and store credit just to buy upgraded tires for a cart she did not even own yet. She worked for it. She earned it. And I was proud to put down the $8,500 to make her dream a reality. My phone rang. The caller ID flashed Merrick's name. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, already bracing myself for whatever crisis he had manufactured this time. "Hey, Deck." Merrick's voice came through the speaker, overly casual, the tone he always used when he was about to ask for money. "Listen, I need a quick favor. Jace wants to go to this elite coding and robotics summer camp. It is a huge opportunity for him, practically guarantees he will be ahead of the curve for middle school. Registration closes Monday." "That sounds great, Merrick," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I hope he has a good time." "Yeah, well, here is the thing," Merrick continued, dropping the casual act. "The tuition is $2,800. I am waiting on a huge client retainer to clear next month, so my cash flow is tied up. I need you to cover the registration fee. I will pay you back, obviously." The word obviously hung in the air, thick with historical irony. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the receipt for Lyra's cart sitting on the table. "No," I said. There was a pause on the line. A long, heavy silence. "What do you mean, no?" Merrick's voice tightened. "I mean, no, Merrick. I am not paying $2,800 for Jace's summer camp. I do not have that kind of cash to just hand over right now." "Are you kidding me?" Merrick's voice rose, the entitlement bleeding through. "You make over $100,000 a year sitting on your ass in a crane. You have 0 expenses. You are single. Do not tell me you do not have $3,000 for your own nephew." "I have expenses," I replied, my voice dropping an octave. "And my finances are not a community chest for you to dip into whenever you feel like playing Father of the Year. Cannot do it." The line went dead. He hung up on me. I put the phone down, knowing the fallout was only minutes away. Exactly 12 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Alden. I answered it, putting it on speaker. "What is wrong with you?" Alden barked before I could even say hello. "Your brother comes to you for help, for the sake of his son's education, and you slam the door in his face?" "I did not slam the door, Dad," I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "I told him I do not have $3,000 to give away. I just bought Lyra a racing cart for her birthday. She has been working at the shop for months, and I promised her." Alden scoffed loudly. "A go-kart? You denied your nephew an educational future, so your tomboy daughter can play in the mud with a dangerous toy? That is a joke, Declan. That is a senseless waste of money. Jace needs this camp. He needs structure. You are sitting on a pile of cash, acting like a selfish miser." "Lyra worked for that cart," I snapped, my temper finally fraying. "She earned it. What has Merrick earned? He sleeps until noon and lives on credit. Do not you dare disrespect your brother." Alden roared through the phone. "He is going through a tough time. You have always been jealous of him, Declan. You have always held your little blue-collar paycheck over his head. You are going to cancel that ridiculous cart and you are going to write a check for Jace's camp. That is what family does. I am not canceling anything, and I am not writing a check. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up the phone and turned it off. That was the extortion. That was the demand. They expected me to cancel my daughter's hard-earned reward to fund my brother's parental ego. When I drew the line, when I finally said the word no, They did not see a boundary. They saw an act of war. The contrast was staggering. My 11-year-old daughter was sweeping dirty shop floors to earn her parts, while a 37-year-old man was throwing a tantrum because his brother would not hand him thousands of dollars. A simple refusal should have been the end of a phone call. But to a narcissist, the word no is an intolerable insult. And that single word was the spark that drove them to turn my daughter's dream into a pile of twisted metal. The night after the truck crushed the cart, the house was suffocatingly quiet. I had swept the broken glass and fiberglass shards into a heavy-duty garbage bag. I threw down a layer of sawdust over the oil slick in the driveway to absorb the mess. Every scrape of the push broom against the concrete felt like sandpaper on my nerves. I was vibrating with a cold, focused anger. I went inside and checked on Lyra. She was sitting on her bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. The broken suede steering wheel was sitting on her nightstand. I sat on the edge of the mattress and put a hand on her shoulder. She leaned into me, and for the first time since the truck pulled into our driveway, she let out a shaky breath. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why does Grandpa hate me?" The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was the question I had spent my entire life trying to shield her from. I wanted to tell her that her grandfather was a broken man, that his toxic favoritism had nothing to do with her worth. I wanted to explain the complicated, twisted psychology of a family that resents the one person who supports them. But she was 11. She just knew that her grandfather had watched her uncle destroy her prized possession and told her she could walk. "He does not hate you, Lyra," I said softly, smoothing her hair. "He is just a very bitter man who does not know how to love properly. But what happened today was not your fault. And I promise you, I am going to make this right. No one gets to treat you like that. No one." I tucked her in, leaving the door cracked so the hallway light spilled into her room. I walked back out to the kitchen and grabbed a beer from the fridge. I was just popping the cap when there was a heavy knock at the front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Callum. Callum was 50 years old, my site foreman, and a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He had been running construction crews since before I was born. He was missing half of his left index finger from a rigging accident in the 90s, and he commanded respect without ever having to raise his voice. He lived 3 blocks over and often stopped by on his evening walks. I opened the door. Callum looked past me, his eyes zeroing in on the sawdust patch in the driveway and the tarp covering the mangled frame of the cart near the garage. He looked back at me, his jaw set. "I saw Alden's truck peel out of here a few hours ago," Callum said, his voice a low rumble. "And I saw the blue metal under that tarp. Tell me I am wrong about what I think just happened." I stepped back and let him in. I handed him a beer, and we stood in the kitchen while I told him everything. I told him about the phone call, the demand for $2,800, the refusal, and the slow, deliberate crunch of the F-150 backing over Lyra's cart. I told him what my father had said to my daughter. Callum did not interrupt. He just stood there, holding his unopened beer, his face hardening with every sentence. When I finished, the silence in the kitchen was heavy. I expected him to tell me to let it go. I expected the standard advice about family being family, about taking the high road and moving on. That is what society tells you to do. But Callum was a man who understood the mechanics of weight and leverage. "You run heavy machinery every day, Declan," Callum said finally, setting his beer on the counter. "You know the principles of balance. You know what happens when a load is not rigged right." I nodded, waiting for the point. "Those 2 men, your father and your brother, they are standing on a platform that you built," Callum continued, pointing a thick, calloused finger at my chest. "They are using your money, your credit, your guilt to keep themselves elevated. And from that height, they think they can spit on you and your little girl. You have spent your whole life reinforcing their platform, hoping they would eventually appreciate it." He took a step closer, his eyes intense. "They will never appreciate it, son. They will just keep adding weight until you break. I have seen guys like you on the site. Guys who take on everyone else's slack until it ruins their own backs. You want to protect your daughter? Stop taking the high road. The high road is for people who have not been run over. It is time you pulled the support beams out from under them." Let gravity do the rest. Callum's words were the validation I did not know I needed. He confirmed what I already knew deep in my gut. I was not crazy. I was not overreacting. I was a man who had been pushed past the breaking point, and it was entirely justified to push back. I am going to cut them off, I said, my voice steady. Completely. Callum nodded, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. Good. You need any help lifting the heavy stuff, you know where I live. He left a few minutes later, leaving his beer untouched. I stood in the kitchen, looking out the window at the dark driveway. I looked at the broken steering wheel sitting on the counter. Looking at Lyra's name etched in the metal, a cold, calculated switch flipped in my brain. The time for hesitation was over. The hour for action had arrived. I walked out to the driveway to secure the tarp over the wreckage before the night dew set in. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet. As I pulled the heavy plastic over the crushed fiberglass, I noticed something strange. The faint glow of a dome light was reflecting off the side of my garage. I turned and realized that in his haste to leave after delivering his final insult, my father had not just driven away. Wait, no, that was not right. Alden and Merrick had driven off in Alden's truck. But earlier that day, before the incident, Merrick had come by in his own car, parking it on the street. He had left it there when he hopped into Alden's truck to execute the hit. I walked over to the curb where Merrick's beat-up sedan was parked. It was a miserable little car, running on the insurance policy that I was paying for. The dome light was on because the driver's side door was not completely shut. Typical Merrick. Careless with everything, assuming the world would just clean up his messes. I reached out and opened the door to turn off the light so the battery would not die. That was when I saw it. Sitting on the passenger seat, face up and glowing softly in the dark, was Merrick's iPad. He took that thing everywhere, treating it like an executive briefcase even though it was mostly used for mobile games and pretending to check stock portfolios. The screen was awake. He must have bumped it when he got out of the car earlier. I do not make a habit of snooping through other people's devices, but Merrick was a man who had just destroyed my daughter's property. The rules of privacy had been crushed under the tires of an F-150. I reached into the car and picked up the tablet. It was not locked. Merrick never used passcodes. He claimed they slowed down his workflow. I swiped up on the screen, intending to just turn it off. But the screen opened directly to his Messages app. And there, sitting at the very top of his inbox, was a group text thread titled Family Business. The participants were Merrick and Alden. The most recent messages were sent just 3 hours before they showed up at my house. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew I should put it down. But the cold logic of the crane operator took over. Information is leverage. I started reading. Merrick at 1:15 in the afternoon. He actually said no. He is too cheap to pay $2,800 for Jace's future, but he buys that stupid racing toy for his kid. Unbelievable. Alden at 1:18. I told you he is selfish. He has always resented you. Do not let him get away with it. We need to teach him a lesson about respect. Merrick at 1:22. I am going to go over there and smash that cart to pieces. I will tell him I did not see it. He cannot prove anything. I will turn his stupid toy into scrap metal. Alden at 1:25. Your car is too light. He will know it was on purpose if you have to ram it 3 times. Use my truck. The F-150 has the clearance and the weight. Just back right over it. It will crush the frame instantly. I will ride with you so he does not try to get violent. Merrick at 1:30. On my way to your house now to get the truck. Let us see how much he loves that toy when it is flat on the concrete. I read the exchange 3 times. My breathing slowed down until I was barely taking in air. The chill in the night air vanished, replaced by a burning heat in my chest. This was not an accident. This was not a sudden crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated. It was a calculated, conspired hit job formulated by a 65-year-old grandfather and a 37-year-old uncle against an 11-year-old girl. They had discussed the logistics. They had chosen the weapon based on its weight and clearance. They had executed a plan. I pulled my own phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline flooding my system. I opened my camera and took clear, high-resolution photos of the iPad screen. I made sure to capture the contact names, the timestamps, and every single word of their toxic conspiracy. I scrolled up a little further and took a few more shots just to establish the context of the conversation. I gathered indisputable digital proof of their malice. When I was done, I pressed the power button on the iPad, plunging the screen into darkness. I placed it exactly where I found it on the passenger seat and pushed the car door shut until it clicked, turning off the dome light. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the dark house where my daughter was sleeping. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Reading those text messages severed the final, fraying thread of obligation I felt toward my bloodline. I did not have a family anymore. I had a pair of thieves and vandals who wore the masks of a father and a brother. And what do you do with vandals? You report them. You lock them out. You strip them of their access to your life. I walked back into my house, locked the front door, and headed straight for my home office. I booted up my laptop. The digital evidence was secure in my phone. Now it was time to deploy the guillotine. It was midnight. The only light in my office came from the glow of my dual monitors. I sat at my desk, my knuckles white as I gripped the mouse. The anger had crystallized into a state of absolute, hyper-focused clarity. I had a checklist in my head, and I was going to execute it with the precision of a surgeon. First on the list, the financial lifeline. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the State Farm insurance portal. I logged in using the credentials I had memorized over the last 30 months. The dashboard loaded, displaying Merrick's beat-up sedan and the active policy status. I clicked on the billing tab. There it was, my Visa ending in 8842, set as the default payment method for autopay. $250 scheduled to be drafted in exactly 3 days. I hovered the cursor over the small trash can icon next to my card number. 30 months. $7,500. Thousands of hours working hundreds of feet in the air, sweating in the summer heat and freezing in the winter wind, all to subsidize the life of a man who plotted to destroy my child's happiness. I clicked the icon. A warning box popped up. Are you sure you want to remove this payment method? This policy will be subject to immediate cancellation if a valid payment method is not provided. I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. Payment method removed. The policy was now a ticking time bomb. Without my card, the insurance company would issue a red notice of cancellation within hours. By morning, Merrick would be driving uninsured, a massive legal risk in our state. One cord cut. Second on the list, the storage unit. Alden lived in a strict homeowners association community that did not allow commercial or oversized vehicles to be parked on the street overnight. So, for the last 3 years, he had been parking his massive F-150 in a secure, climate-controlled storage facility on the edge of town. The unit was rented under my name, because Alden's credit was shot from a bad real estate investment a decade ago. I was the primary leaseholder. I paid the $180 a month, and I held the master access code. I logged into the storage facilities management portal. The system showed Unit 402 active. I navigated to the gate access settings. The current PIN was 1102, Alden's birth month and day. I highlighted the numbers and deleted them. I typed in a new code, 9999. I hit save. The system confirmed the update. Right now, that heavy Ford truck, the weapon they used against my daughter, was parked safely inside that unit. But tomorrow morning, when Alden went to retrieve his truck for his weekly golf outing, his code would not open the gate. He would be locked out of a unit he did not own, unable to access the vehicle he loved more than his own son. 2 cords cut. Third on the list, the law. I opened the website for the local police department and navigated to the online reporting system for property damage and vandalism. I filled out the forms methodically. Date of incident. Location. Estimated value of damaged property. $8,500. Suspect names. Merrick and Alden. I described the event exactly as it happened. And then, in the section for supporting evidence, I uploaded the photos I had taken of the text messages on Merrick's iPad. Premeditation. conspiracy to commit property damage. I submitted the report and received an automated case number in my email. The digital paperwork was filed. The trap was set. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. It was done. The guillotine was armed. I was just about to shut down the computer and try to get a few hours of sleep when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message. I picked it up, expecting it to be an automated alert. But the name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Kasia, my ex-wife Lyra's mother. We had been divorced for 6 years. It was not a bitter split, just two people who grew apart. But she had moved to the West Coast and her communication was infrequent. Kasia's text read, "Hey Declan. Sorry to text so late. I was going over my bank statements and realized I never got a thank you from Lyra for her birthday check this year. Did it arrive? I sent it to Merrick's address like I always do since I never got your new house address." I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. "What birthday check?" I texted back immediately. Kasia replied a minute later. "I send Lyra a check for $300 every year for her birthday. I have been mailing them to Merrick's house for the last 3 years because he told me you moved and he would pass them along. Did she not get them? 3 years. $300 a year. $900 total." A cold, dark void opened up in my chest. Merrick had not just destroyed my daughter's cart. He had not just demanded my money for his son. For 3 years, he had been intercepting mail from Lyra's mother. He had been stealing my daughter's birthday money, cashing those checks to fund his pathetic lifestyle, while smiling in my face at family dinners. He stole from an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old. I did not reply to Kasia right away. I could not. The rage that washed over me was so absolute, so blindingly pure, that the room seemed to spin. Removing the insurance card and changing the gate code suddenly felt like child's play. They were not just toxic family members. They were common criminals. They were thieves who preyed on a child. I took a screenshot of Kasia's text messages. I added it to a new folder on my desktop titled Evidence. The financial ledger just got heavier. The debt just grew. One card was canceled. One gate code was changed. One police report was filed. By tomorrow morning, the sun would rise, and their entire world would begin to collapse. And the best part was, they had no idea I was the one holding the sledgehammer. Are you ready to see a grown man's life fall apart before his morning coffee? Are you ready to see what happens when the invisible sun finally stops paying the bills? The morning is coming, and the red notice is already in the mail. Do not forget to subscribe because the real demolition is just getting started. The sun rose on Wednesday morning with a harsh, unforgiving glare, burning away the lingering chill of the night. For me, it was the start of a regular workday. I was up at 5 in the morning, brewing strong black coffee, lacing up my steel-toed boots, and preparing for another 12-hour shift suspended in the sky above the city. But for Merrick and Alden, this morning was going to be the exact moment their artificial reality shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I had set the digital traps just before midnight, and the mechanisms of consequence operate without sympathy, without hesitation, and most importantly, without the guilt they usually relied on to keep me in line. Merrick's morning routine was a carefully curated illusion. He usually woke up around 7, brewed expensive artisanal coffee he bought on my dime, and spent an hour scrolling through business articles to maintain his self-image as a startup visionary. But today, his routine was interrupted before his feet even hit the floor. At exactly 7:09 in the morning, an automated email from State Farm Insurance bypassed his spam filter and landed directly in his primary inbox. The subject line was flagged with a bright, undeniable red banner. Urgent notice of policy cancellation. According to the panicked voicemail he left me 20 minutes later, he had opened the email while still lying in bed, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The text was cold and bureaucratic. It stated that due to the sudden removal of the primary payment method, his auto insurance policy for the sedan was suspended effective immediately. It explicitly warned that operating the vehicle on public roads was now a violation of state law, carrying heavy fines, possible license suspension, and vehicle impoundment. Merrick had a 9 o'clock meeting across town that morning. It was one of his phantom business pitches, a meeting he had bragged about endlessly at the last family dinner, claiming it was the breakthrough deal that would finally launch his consulting firm into the stratosphere. He needed his car. He needed to project the image of a successful, reliable professional. But you cannot project success when you are legally barred from turning the ignition key. At the exact same time Merrick was staring at his phone in a cold sweat, Alden was experiencing his own personalized nightmare on the outskirts of the city. My father loved his Wednesday morning golf games. It was his weekly opportunity to gather with his retired friends, complain about the younger generation, and pretend he was the patriarch of a flawless family empire. To get to the golf course, he needed his clubs. And his clubs were in the bed of his massive Ford F-150 pickup truck, the same truck he had used as a battering ram against my daughter's cart. That truck was parked inside Unit 402 at the East Side storage facility. I pictured the scene clearly in my mind as I drove to my construction site. Alden pulling up to the main security gate in his small daily driver. He would roll down the window, feeling the heavy, humid morning air, and punch his birth date into the metal keypad. 1102. The keypad would beep a harsh, flat tone of rejection. The red light would flash. Access denied. He would scowl, assuming he simply pressed the wrong button with his thick fingers. He would try again. 1102. Beep. Access denied. He would try a third time, a fourth time, his frustration mounting with every flashing red light. The sun would be beating down on the asphalt, heating up the interior of his car. He would get out, walk up to the keypad, and pound the keys, demanding entry to the unit he firmly believed belonged to him just because his son paid the bill. But the steel gate would remain shut, an unyielding barrier separating him from his prized truck. He was locked out, stranded in the heat, while his golf buddies were already teeing off at the first hole. My phone started ringing while I was putting on my hard hat at the base of the tower crane. It was Merrick. I let it ring. 2 minutes later, another call. Alden. I let it ring. By the time I climbed the ladder and settled into the operator's cabin 200 feet in the air, I had 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. I took a sip of my thermos coffee, enjoying the panoramic view of the city waking up below me, and pressed play on the first message. Declan. What the hell is going on? Merrick's voice was shrill, entirely stripped of its usual arrogant drawl. My insurance just got canceled. The email says the payment card was removed. I have the biggest meeting of my life in an hour and a half and I cannot drive my car. Put the card back on right now. This is not funny. I deleted the message. I played the next one. It was Alden, his voice tight with anger and confusion. Declan, the damn gate at the storage place is broken. My code is not working and the manager is not answering the office phone. Call me back immediately and fix this. I am going to be late for my tea time. I smiled, a thin, humorless smile, and dialed Merrick's number. He answered on the first ring, panting slightly as if he had been pacing the floor. Declan. Finally, he shouted. Did you hear my message? You need to call State Farm and put the visa back on the account. I do not know why it glitched, but I cannot drive without coverage. It did not glitch, Merrick, I said, my voice steady, echoing slightly in the glass cabin of the crane. I removed the card. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was the sound of a man's brain misfiring, trying to process a reality that directly contradicted his lifelong assumption of entitlement. What do you mean you removed it? He stammered. I mean I am done financing the life of a man who destroys my daughter's belongings. I replied, my tone as flat and hard as concrete. You wanted to act like a thug in my driveway? You wanted to conspire with the old man to crush a little girl's dream? You can do it on your own dime. You cannot do this. He shrieked, panic finally setting in. I have a pitch meeting. I am going to lose the client. We are family, Declan. You cannot just cut me off. I am not cutting off family, I said. I am stopping my automatic payments to a vandal. You better check the bus schedule, Merrick. It is a long walk to the business district. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. I looked down at the tiny cars crawling along the highway below, feeling the massive weight of the tower crane responding to the gentle pressure of my hands on the controls. Down there, They were scrambling, suffocating under the sudden loss of my financial support. They thought the consequences of their actions would just fade away into the usual family rug sweeping. But they were wrong. The red notice was just the first tremor. The earthquake was scheduled for 1 o'clock this afternoon. By the time I pulled into my driveway at 12:45 in the afternoon, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a saw. I had taken a half-day off work, a rare occurrence, because some demolition jobs require you to be on the ground, standing face to face with the structure you are bringing down. I parked my truck and walked up to the front porch. I did not go inside. I just leaned against the wooden railing, waiting. Next door, Callum was in his front yard. He had a garden hose in one hand, lightly watering a patch of hydrangeas that did not need watering, and a heavy iron pipe wrench resting conspicuously on the brick retaining wall near his feet. He gave me a slow nod. We did not exchange a single word, but his presence was a fortified wall at my flank. He was the silent witness, the undeniable proof that I was not alone in this fight. At exactly 1 o'clock, Merrick's sedan screeched around the corner and slammed to a halt at the curb in front of my house. He had driven it. The fool had actually driven an uninsured vehicle through city traffic. That decision alone spoke volumes about his arrogance. He believed the rules simply did not apply to him. Alden was in the passenger seat. They both threw their doors open and marched up my driveway, their faces flushed with a toxic mixture of rage, humiliation, and sheer disbelief. Merrick looked disheveled. His expensive polo shirt was wrinkled, and his hair was standing up in tufts. His phantom business meeting must have been a disaster, assuming he even made it there. Alden looked even worse. The veins in his neck were bulging, his golf shirt stained with sweat from standing in the morning sun outside a locked gate. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, staring up at me. "Turn the card back on," Merrick barked, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "And give Dad the new gate code. You have lost your damn mind. Declan, you are throwing a temper tantrum over a toy and trying to ruin my livelihood." Alden stepped forward, trying to assert his decaying patriarchal authority. "This ends right now, Declan. I do not know what kind of power trip you think you are on, but you do not treat your blood like this. Give me the code to my storage unit. I have been stranded all morning." I looked down at them from the elevated porch. I did not raise my voice. I did not match their frantic, chaotic energy. I reached into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, making sure they watched my every movement. "You want to talk about livelihoods, Merrick?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet suburban street. "Let us talk about ledgers. Let us talk about exactly what this family business costs to operate." I held the paper up. It was a printed spreadsheet itemized down to the last decimal point, though the numbers were vast. Line item 1. I read aloud, my eyes locked on Merrick's pale face. "One custom racing go-kart, destroyed by a Ford truck. Replacement value, $8,500. That was an accident," Merrick yelled, his voice cracking. I ignored him and moved to the next line. Line item 2. 30 months of auto insurance premiums paid via Visa card ending in 8842. $250 a month. Total, $7,500. Merrick's jaw snapped shut. He looked nervously at Alden, who suddenly seemed very interested in the concrete driveway. Line item 3, I continued, my voice unwavering. 36 months of climate-controlled storage rental for one oversized vehicle. $180 a month. Total, $6,480. Alden swallowed hard. "You owe me respect," he muttered, though it sounded weak, stripped of its usual venom. "I am your father. I raised you. You raised me to be a wallet, Dad." I corrected him, my tone laced with ice. "But we are not done." Line item 4 is the most interesting one. I looked directly into Merrick's eyes. They were darting back and forth, searching for an escape route that did not exist. Line item 4, I said, enunciating every syllable. 3 years of stolen birthday checks addressed to Lyra, sent by her mother, Kasia. $300 a year. intercepted, cashed, and spent. Total, $900. The color drained from Merrick's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Alden turned to look at his golden child, shock finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "What is he talking about, Merrick?" Alden demanded, his voice trembling. "You stole mail? From your niece?" Merrick took a step backward, his hands coming up in a defensive surrender. I was going to pay it back," he stammered, his eyes darting toward Callum, who had stopped watering the bushes and was now leaning heavily against the fence, gripping the iron wrench. "I was short on rent. It was just a temporary loan, Declan. I swear to God." "Grand total," I declared, speaking over his pathetic excuses. $30,380. That is the price tag of your entitlement. That is the cost of my invisible labor. You called my job filthy. You told my daughter she could walk. You ran over her belongings because I refused to hand over more cash. You thought you were standing on a solid foundation, but you were just standing on my shoulders. And now I am shrugging. I stepped down one stair. Alden grabbed the hood of Merrick's sedan to steady himself, his knees literally buckling under the weight of the realization that his entire lifestyle, his son's lifestyle, was built on a mountain of my undocumented generosity. "You are going to give me the gate code," Alden whispered, his voice raspy, pleading. "Please, Declan. It is my truck." "The truck is locked in a unit registered to my name," I replied. "It stays there, because it is no longer just a truck, Dad. It is a murder weapon. It is the instrument you use to commit a felony." Merrick let out a desperate, high-pitched laugh. "A felony? You are insane. It was a toy. You cannot call the cops on your own family. They will laugh in your face." As if on cue, the heavy, rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel sounded from the end of the street. A dark gray, unmarked Ford Explorer rolled slowly down the block, coming to a stop directly behind Merrick's illegally driven, uninsured sedan. The driver's door opened, and a man in a sharp suit with a gold shield clipped to his belt stepped out. "They are not laughing, Merrick," I said quietly, watching the detective approach. "I think it is time you start walking, like everyone else." The arrival of the unmarked police vehicle shifted the atmosphere in the driveway from a bitter family dispute to a cold, unforgiving crime scene. Detective Vaughn was a man who moved with the deliberate, heavy steps of someone who had seen every variation of human greed and stupidity. He did not look at the house or the neat lawns. His eyes were fixed entirely on Merrick and Alden, analyzing their panicked body language before he even introduced himself. "Declan?" the detective asked, stopping a few feet away from the rear bumper of Merrick's sedan. "That is me," I replied, remaining on the porch steps. "I am Detective Vaughn, Property Crimes Division," he said, flashing his badge briefly. "I received the report you filed online last night. I also reviewed the digital evidence you attached regarding the destruction of the recreational vehicle." Merrick spun around, his hands flying to his head. "Digital evidence? What evidence?" "He is making this up, officer. It was a family misunderstanding. I accidentally backed over his kid's toy. That is it. We are sorting it out internally." Detective Vaughn did not look at Merrick. He kept his eyes on me, then slowly pulled a thick manila folder from under his arm. He flipped it open. "Merrick, is it?" Vaughn asked, reading from the top sheet. "Yes, sir," Merrick choked out, sweat beading on his forehead despite the breeze. "Are you the owner of an Apple iPad? Serial number ending in 447X? Vaughn inquired, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Merrick froze. His eyes widened, realizing exactly what he had left in his unlocked car the day before. "Yes," he whispered. Vaughn pulled out a glossy, high-resolution printout of the photograph I had taken. It showed the entire group chat, perfectly legible, time-stamped, and undeniable. "I have here a documented conversation between you and a contact labeled Dad," Vaughn stated, holding the photo up so both Merrick and Alden could see it. "In this exchange, you explicitly state your intention to, quote, smash that cart to pieces, end quote. The contact labeled Dad then advises you to use his Ford F-150 pickup truck due to its, quote, clearance and weight, end quote. He also states he will accompany you to ensure the act is completed without interference. Alden leaned heavily against the car, his face turning an ashen gray. He looked like a man who was having a heart attack, the realization of his own written words crushing the breath out of his lungs. In this state, Vaughn continued, his voice dropping into a lethal, official cadence. Intentional destruction of property valued over $5,000 is classified as a felony. Furthermore, conspiracy to commit a felony elevates the severity of the charges for all participating parties. But it is just a toy, Alden croaked, his voice desperate. He is my son. You do not arrest family over a go-kart. The law does not recognize family exemptions for felony vandalism. Sir, Vaughn replied smoothly. The law recognizes value, intent, and execution. You planned it. You provided the weapon. You executed the destruction. Vaughn turned to Merrick. Are you currently operating this vehicle? He asked, pointing to the sedan. Merrick swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Vaughn pulled a small tablet from his pocket, tapped the screen a few times, and looked up. The license plate returns a flag. State Farm canceled the liability policy on this vehicle at 7:09 this morning. Driving without insurance is a severe traffic violation. I could have this vehicle impounded right now, and you arrested on the spot for both the vandalism and the traffic offense. Merrick's knees gave out. He slid down the side of the car, sitting on the concrete driveway, burying his face in his hands. He was crying. The golden child, the startup visionary, reduced to a sobbing mess on the pavement because the invisible safety net had finally been cut. I am not taking you into custody today, Vaughn said, snapping the folder shut. But consider this your formal notification. Warrants are being drawn up. You will both receive court summons by the end of the week. You will be required to appear before a judge to answer for the property damage, and the vehicle impoundment will be processed if you attempt to drive that sedan one more inch without proof of coverage. Do not leave the county. Vaughn turned, gave me a brief, professional nod, and walked back to his Explorer. He drove away, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. I looked down at the two men in my driveway. They were broken. The arrogant posture, the demanding tones, the cruel dismissals, they were all gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of legal consequences. The gate code stays changed, I said quietly. The insurance stays canceled. The lawsuit for the stolen checks is being filed tomorrow. Get off my property, and do not ever come near my daughter again. Merrick did not argue. Alden did not yell. They helped each other up, looking like two fragile old men, and slowly walked down the street toward the bus stop, leaving the uninsured car sitting at my curb. I watched them walk, feeling a profound sense of closure. If you are enjoying this story of ultimate accountability, drop a W for win in the comments below. I will be hearting and replying to everyone who proves they made it this far into the demolition of a toxic family. Keep listening because the aftermath is even better. The weeks that followed the confrontation on my driveway were a masterclass in the slow, agonizing grind of self-inflicted ruin. When you spend your entire life relying on someone else to catch you, the fall to the ground is not just painful. It is entirely disorienting. Merrick and Alden had no idea how to function in a world where I was not silently paying the toll for their mistakes. The first domino to fall was Merrick's illusion of a career. Because he could not legally drive his uninsured car, and he had no money to pay the exorbitant deposit required to reinstate a policy with a history of cancellations, he was forced to rely on the city bus system. Public transportation is a fine way to get around, but for a narcissist who built his identity on the image of a high-rolling consultant, it was a daily public humiliation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Merrick was showing up to client meetings drenched in sweat. His cheap suits wrinkled from sitting on crowded buses for an hour and a half. Without the flexibility of a car, he missed deadlines, arrived late to pitches, and quickly lost the few fragile contracts he had managed to secure. His income, which was already microscopic, plummeted to zero. He could no longer afford the rent on his upscale apartment. Within a month, he was facing an eviction notice, forced to pack his meager belongings and move into Alden's cramped guest bedroom. The golden child had finally returned to the nest, not as a conquering hero, but as a destitute failure. But Alden's life was not faring much better. The loss of the storage unit had created a logistical nightmare that was bleeding him dry. Because he was locked out of the facility, he had no choice but to wait for the police detective to officially release the truck from the evidence hold. When that finally happened 2 weeks later, Alden had to pay a massive towing fee to get the Ford F-150 out of the storage facility, because he still did not have the gate code to drive it out himself. He towed it back to his strict homeowners association neighborhood and parked it on the street in front of his house. That was his second fatal mistake. The neighborhood rules clearly prohibited the street parking of commercial-sized trucks overnight. Alden, accustomed to the luxury of my paid storage unit, had never bothered to read the bylaws. The neighborhood association was merciless. The first ticket was $50, tucked under the windshield wiper on a Tuesday morning. Alden threw it away in a fit of rage. The second ticket, issued on Thursday, was $100. By the following week, the association escalated the fines. They began issuing alternate side parking violations because the truck was too big to fit in his driveway without blocking the sidewalk. Alden was bleeding $240 a week in parking fines. He could not move the truck because he could not afford to rent a new storage unit at the current market rates, and his credit was too poor to qualify for a lease anyway. The truck, the very weapon he had used to crush my daughter's cart, became an inescapable financial anchor dragging him to the bottom. I imagined him sitting in his living room, staring out the front window at the massive, useless block of metal, watching the association security guard write yet another yellow ticket. It was a profound, poetic justice. The tool of his cruelty had become the instrument of his torment. As for the stolen birthday checks, Kasia was livid. When I explained the situation to her, she immediately contacted her bank to retrieve the endorsed copies of the cleared checks. The signatures on the back were blatant forgeries. Merrick had clumsily signed Lyra's name, followed by his own, depositing the funds directly into his checking account. Kasia joined my civil lawsuit, adding federal mail fraud to the growing list of Merrick's legal catastrophes. They tried to call, of course. In the quiet hours of the evening, my phone would register blocked numbers and unknown callers. Voicemails were left, alternating between tearful apologies and bitter, frantic accusations. Alden left a message begging me to drop the felony charges, claiming his heart condition could not handle the stress of a trial. Merrick left messages blaming me for his ruined career, saying I had set him up to fail. I never answered. I never called back. I saved the voicemails in the digital folder labeled evidence, adding them to the archive of their madness. I had spent 34 years listening to their voices, letting their demands dictate my actions, letting their insults shape my self-worth. The silence I imposed on them now was not just a punishment. It was a sanctuary. I was finally breathing clean air. The dominoes were falling exactly as gravity intended, and for the first time in my life, I was not standing in their path to catch them. There is a distinct smell in a working garage that I have always loved. It is a mixture of heavy grease, fresh rubber, and the sharp, metallic tang of tools hitting concrete. It is the smell of progress. It is the smell of things being put right. On a crisp Saturday morning, exactly 5 weeks after the destruction in my driveway, Callum and I were standing in my garage, surrounded by that smell. In the center of the floor sat a massive wooden shipping crate. Stamped on the side in bold black letters was the logo of the premier racing kart manufacturer in the country. Callum walked around the crate, holding a crowbar, a grin splitting his weathered face. "You ready to crack this open, Declan?" he asked, tapping the wood. I nodded, holding a heavy hammer. "Let us do it." We pried the wooden panels apart, the nails screaming as they pulled free. Inside, gleaming under the fluorescent garage lights, was a brand-new, upgraded racing chassis. It was a deeper, richer blue than the original. It had a reinforced, professional-grade roll cage, wider racing slicks, and an engine block that promised twice the horsepower of the kart Merrick had crushed. It cost $9,200, and I did not pay a single cent of my own money for it. The funds had come directly from Merrick. Facing a guaranteed felony conviction and a massive civil judgment, his public defender had begged for a settlement. We agreed to drop the criminal property damage charges to a misdemeanor, but only if Merrick paid full restitution upfront, including the stolen birthday checks, plus legal fees. To avoid going to prison, Merrick had been forced to liquidate everything he owned. He sold his designer watch collection, his high-end golf clubs, his gaming computer, and finally, his beloved sedan. He drained his non-existent savings and borrowed the rest from a predatory payday loan company. The check cleared my bank account on Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had ordered the new cart. Lyra did not know. She thought the racing season was over for her. She had been quiet the last few weeks, retreating into her schoolwork, trying to hide the lingering sadness of watching her grandfather tell her she deserved nothing. "Go get her," Callum said, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "I will get the tools ready for the final assembly." I walked into the house. Lyra was sitting at the kitchen table doing math homework. I tapped the table. "Hey kiddo, put the pencil down. I need your help in the garage." She sighed, assuming I needed her to hold a flashlight or sweep up sawdust. "Okay, Dad." She followed me out the back door and into the garage. When she stepped over the threshold, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide, tracing the sleek, aggressive lines of the new cart sitting on the hydraulic lift. She looked at Callum, who was grinning from ear to ear, holding a torque wrench. Then she looked at me, her mouth hanging open in shock. Is that for me?" she whispered, as if speaking too loudly would make the vision disappear. I walked over to the workbench and picked up the item I had been saving for this exact moment. It was the custom suede steering wheel from the original cart. The metal was slightly scratched, bearing the scars of the F-150's tires, but the engraved letters of Lyra's name were still bright and clear. "I promised you I would fix it," I said, walking over to the new cart. I knelt down and slid the old steering wheel onto the brand new steering column, locking it into place with a satisfying metallic click. There are some things that get broken and can never be put back together. But there are other things, if you care about them enough, that you build back stronger than before. Lyra did not say a word. She ran across the garage and threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tight, feeling the weight of the last 5 weeks lift off my chest. I looked over her head at Callum, who gave me a solemn, respectful nod. "Go on," I told Lyra, pulling back. "Climb in. Let us see if it fits." She scrambled into the bucket seat, her hands instantly gripping the suede wheel. She pressed the ignition button. The garage filled with the deep, throaty roar of a high-performance engine. It was loud. It was powerful. And it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a father doing things the right way. It was the sound of a daughter's pride being restored. And somewhere across town, a man who thought he could crush us was waiting at a bus stop in the rain. The final chapter of this ordeal was written in a sterile, brightly lit courtroom downtown. I sat in the wooden pews at the back of the room, watching the proceedings with the detached calmness of a man who had already won the war. Merrick stood before the judge, looking utterly defeated. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. Without his car, without his stolen funds, and without the unearned arrogance that had shielded him his entire life, he looked small. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who clearly had zero patience for family drama, read the settlement agreement into the official record. "Mr. Ryland," the judge said, looking sternly over her glasses at Merrick, "you have liquidated your assets to provide full financial restitution for the property damage and the unauthorized cashing of checks belonging to a minor. In exchange, the plaintiff has agreed to reduce the charges, keeping you out of a state penitentiary. You are incredibly fortunate that your brother possesses a level of mercy you clearly lack. You are hereby sentenced to 300 hours of community service, 2 years of supervised probation, and a permanent restraining order forbidding you from contacting Declan Ryland or his daughter, Lyra. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Merrick mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Alden was sitting a few rows ahead of me. He looked older, frilier. The stress of the parking tickets, the towing fees, and the shame of watching his golden boy plead guilty to stealing from a child had aged him 10 years in 2 months. When the gavel banged, finalizing the severance, Alden turned and looked at me. His eyes were filled with a desperate, unspoken plea for reconciliation. He wanted the invisible son back. He wanted the wallet, the safety net, the punching bag. I looked right through him. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. The door swung shut behind me, severing the last physical tie I had to the toxic anchor that had dragged me down for 34 years. Later that afternoon, the sun was shining bright and hot over the local dirt track. The smell of high-octane fuel and exhaust hung in the air. I stood at the chain-link fence, leaning against the metal, a cold bottle of water in my hand. Callum was standing next to me, checking a stopwatch. Out on the track, a blur of deep blue metal tore through the final corner, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. The engine screamed as the cart hit the straightaway. Lyra was behind the wheel, her helmet visor down, her hands tightly gripping the scratched suede steering wheel that bore her name. She crossed the finish line, beating her personal best time by 2 full seconds. She pulled into the pit lane, killed the engine, and pulled off her helmet. Her face was covered in dirt, her hair was matted with sweat, and she was smiling so hard it looked like her cheeks might crack. She looked at me, giving me a huge thumbs up. I gave her a thumbs up back. "You raised a good kid, Declan," Callum said quietly, not taking his eyes off the track. "She knows the value of the work. She knows what things cost." "Yeah," I replied, watching Lyra wipe the dirt off her visor. "She does now." I had spent my life thinking that being a good family member meant absorbing the pain to keep the peace. I thought being the bigger person meant letting people trample over my boundaries because we shared the same last name. But sitting in that crane 200 feet in the air, you learn that boundaries are what keep the structure from collapsing. If you let people chip away at your foundation, eventually, everything you care about will fall. I had to become the villain in their story to become the hero in my daughter's. I had to pull the rug out from under them so she could have a solid place to stand. And watching her out there, strong, confident, and entirely unafraid, I knew I had made the only right choice. They thought they could crush a cart and teach her a lesson about walking. Instead, they taught me a lesson about when to finally close the door. So, that brings me to the final question for all of you watching. When the dust settled, and my father looked at me in that courtroom with tears in his eyes, begging silently for a second chance, I walked away without a word. Was I right to permanently cut them out of our lives and refuse to accept their belated apologies? Or should I have shown mercy now that the debt was paid? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching Family Fault Lines. If you have ever had to set a hard boundary to protect your peace, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Until next time, stay strong and keep your doors locked to those who don't respect you.